All right. So in the previous video in regards to data flows, we did a very simple example using an Excel file for leads, where we brought in leads directly from an Excel file located in our OneDrive. For this example, we're going to do something a little bit more complex because we're actually going to do some data manipulation in Power Query before we pull that information in from our Excel file. So we're here in Dynamics. I have set up some custom fields on my account record, and I've got a financial account as one of my custom entities. So what I want to pull in is I've got a list of transactional data. Let's just hypothetically say that I downloaded that from a custodian. So let's say you're a financial firm and you want to be able to keep track of your clients' finances directly within CRM. So we've got an Excel file with transactional data, and then we've got a separate sheet on that same Excel file with our holdings for those specific financial accounts. So example account here actually is Fine Candles. We've got our overall portfolio value. We want to actually get or pull in how many transactions this month we have in our file, how many deposits this month, withdrawals this month, management fees this month. And then we also are going to pull in financial accounts directly from that transactional data. So we're going to pull in the name, the account number, the account value, the transaction this month, deposit this month, withdrawals, and management fees, very similar to what we're doing for the overarching account. And you can't see just yet, but I also have a subgrid for holdings and a subgrid for transactions. You can't see those because I haven't saved this financial account yet. I just wanted to let you see what that looks like here in Dynamics before we actually pull that information in from our Excel file. So you notice here we've got six accounts. We're going to create one called Wilson Enterprises, just going off my last name. So we will see 7 here once we're done getting our data flow set up. So again, here I've got show you my financials file real quick. So just made up some information. I've got 5 different financial accounts for my one account within Dynamics. So just made up some account numbers, some different values, different transaction types. This is all just off the top of my head. There's obviously way more transaction types for those of you in the finance industry. So we've got our transactions on sheet 1, and then we've got our holdings on sheet 2. Again, just made up data. The financial accounts, we've got a symbol, the name of that symbol, share quantity, current price, the market value for each of those underlying holdings, and then our financial account number. So again, for the tables that you're wanting to load data into, you do need to make sure that you have those keys created for each table. So for my tables for financial account, my financial account number is my key. For my account, I'm just using the account name. Not recommended. You may have accounts with the same name, so you would want to use something a little bit more specific that's going to be more unique to those records. For my holdings, my symbol is my key, and then for my transaction, I'm going to use a transaction ID. Now, usually when you get transactional data from a custodian, it's going to have a transaction ID. Since I don't have any, I'm just going to add an index column when we get into Power Query, and I'm going to use that for my key. So we're going to flip over in Power Apps to data flows, and I'm going to start a new data flow. And I'm going to call this one financial data. And I'm going to create. Again, this example, we're just using Excel file. I don't have a way to really pull in anything from a SQL file or Exchange. So for these examples, we are just using an Excel workbook. So I already have that file saved to my OneDrive. So there's my financials XLSX file. and I'm going to select that. And then I'm going to click next. Now, in our last example for leads, we just had one sheet. This Excel file does have two sheets. So we're going to grab both of those. So we've got our holdings and our transactions. You can see it's pulling in that transactional data, and there's our very simple holdings file. I'm going to go ahead and click Transform Data. And once this loads, what we need to do is, there's information on both of these sheets that we need for multiple record types. Now, you'll remember there was a couple of different data points that I wanted to pull out. I wanted to pull out transactions this month, withdrawals, deposits, management fees this month. So we're going to walk through a couple of different examples of the ways you can manipulate the data here in Power Query. So the first thing I want to do is I want to be able to break out my transactions based on my transaction type. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select that column. I'm going to go to my Transform tab, and I'm going to pivot that column. I'm going to pivot that column, and I want the amount to be my value in that column. So I'm going to select amount, and then I'm going to sum those amounts up. And this will break out those transaction types into multiple columns. So now you can see I've got withdrawals, deposits, management fees, buys, sells, covers. I don't have any transactions. Well, I do have a couple of transactions set up for those types. So there we go. We've got our pivoted table now. And anytime you perform a calculation or make a change, it's going to let you know over here on the right-hand panel what steps have been applied to your data. So right now, the only thing that I've done is I have pivoted my table. When you first load your data in, it will promote your headers automatically, and it will try to change your column types based on the data that's within. There are times where you may have to update your column types to match what the field type or field type in Dynamics. Now, since my holdings table has the actual market value, which is what I need to use to determine what my overall financial account value is, what my overall account value is, I need to combine these tables into one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my Home tab, and I am going to append my queries as a new. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull both of these sheets into the same sheet, but I want to create a new one because I do need to do a little bit more manipulation in these separate sheets. So I'm going to do that as a new query. And I'm going to combine my transactions table with my holdings table. So now we can see if we scroll over to the right, or excuse me, I guess they put them, let's see, there we go. We've got, quantity, name. We've got, it pulled over the information or the columns from both of my sheets into one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and right click on this, and I'm going to rename this. And I'm going to rename this one and what I want to do is I'm going to make a copy of this. I'm going to duplicate this. And I'm going to call this one financial accounts. Now my accounts, well, before I continue on, actually let's Actually, before we copy that, I'm actually going to make updates, do a little manipulation to my account. So I've got all my transactional data here. Now, I mentioned earlier, I want to be able to extract transactions for this month. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a custom column, and this is going to be a Boolean or true false. And I'm going to call this one transactions in current month. Now you can see, just barely getting into this, you can get extremely complex. I just know some very basic formulas, so I do know how to use a formula to check to see if a certain date is in the current month. It's just date dot is in current. Now what we want to do is we want to specify what date are we checking. So we're going to grab our transaction date and insert that column, and then select OK. So now we can see it gives us a true false based on whether or not that transaction is in the current month. So if we just look at, if we scroll over, you can see that all of these are in November. Those top ones are in October. So we can see it set false for the ones in October and true for the ones in November. So now what I want to do is, now that I have determined whether or not those transactions are in the current month or not, I want to know if the transactions are either withdrawals, deposits, or management fees. So now I'm going to add a conditional column. And this one is going to be deposits. And what I'm going to do is I want to check that column that I just created, transactions in current month. If that value is true, then I want to pull in the value of my deposits. So there's my deposit column. If that statement is false or condition is false, I'm going to just set the value of that row to null. So now we can see this transaction right here was in the current month. And so we're pulling in the value of that particular deposit. So what I want to do is I want to add a couple more. I want to do withdrawals current month. I'm going to check that same true or false field. If true, and this time I want to grab my withdrawals. With my withdrawals, if the statement is not true, then I'm going to plug in null there. All right, so we've got deposits, withdrawals. Now we just need to do management fees. Management fees this month. If true, then we're going to grab management fee. Not null. Now, if we flip back over to Dynamics real quick, one of my other data points that I want to know is how many transactions total has this specific financial account had this month. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add an additional column, and this one's going to be just transactions this month. And again, I'm using that same column. If the transaction is in the current month, if that's true, instead of pulling in a value, I just want a 1 there. I want to note that that transaction was in this current month. If it's not, I'm going to put a 0, because what I'm going to do in a little bit is I'm going to sum these up, and I'm going to just use that 1 to sum to get my total number of transactions for the current month. So there we can see it added zeros for transactions not in the current month and 1s for ones that are. So that is all the manipulation that I need to do for this particular table. Now I can go back and I can actually copy this like I was going to do earlier, duplicate. And this one I'm going to rename to financial. For my holdings, I don't need to do any manipulation for that. This can just load straight in. And for my transactions, I'm actually going to make, I'm going to make a copy of these. For some reason, and I don't know if this is documented anywhere, but when you reference another table, it adds this little lightning bolt here. And what tends to happen is, or at least just for me, when I try to load information into my account record, I get an error. So what I want to do is I'm just going to make a copy or duplicate both of these, since they were used to combine to create this additional query. And what I can do now is, if you right click, I can deselect the enable load. And when I deselect the enable load, it removes the reference for these two queries based on those. And now I can just use, I can use the newly copied queries to load my transactions and my holdings. So I'm just going to rename this one transactions. And for the holdings not. Okay. So now we have 4 different sheets that we can use to load data into our 4 different tables in Dynamics. So we're going to have the account table, we're going to have the financial account table, transactions, and holdings. Now, in this account query, I clearly do not need all of this information or all this data, and there's not even fields on the account for all this information. So what I want to do is I want to manipulate this and put it in a format that will actually allow me to load this to the account record. So with this selected, I'm going to click on the transform tab, and I'm going to update my groupings. I'm going to change this to advanced, and for the account, the only thing that I want to group by is the overarching account, where there will be multiple financial accounts living under. So I'm going to group by just the account. And now whatever data points I want to load into Dynamics, I need to have as columns. So what I'm going to do now is I want transactions this month. And I'm going to grab the sum of those transactions this month. And so here's where I'm going to reference that conditional column that I created that has either the 1 or a 0 in it. So now if I select this and I'm summing those, any transaction that has a 1 in that column is going to sum up and give me a total number of transactions this month. And it's going to be grouped at the account level. So I know I'm going to want my withdrawals this month. And I want a sum of those withdrawals. Now, if I did withdrawal right here, it's going to give me all the withdrawals for each account, no matter the month. So I want to make sure that I grab the column the conditional column that I created for only withdrawals in the current month. I'm going to do the same for deposits. Again, we're summing. And while we're doing this, you can see all the different ways you can manipulate the data here in Power Query. We're going to select sum. Now this one we're going to select deposits in current month. And then we're going to do management fees. Again, summing. And the other big thing that we need to make sure that we grab is the account value. And the account value is going to be a sum of all of the market values from our different holdings. So, Apple, you've got a value for that. You've got a value for General Electric. All those different values and different rows on our holdings table, we're going to sum the market value for those. And I'm just going to quickly check and make sure there's nothing else I need. We do need the account number. So we need to go grab that. Actually, we don't need that was for the financial account, excuse me. We don't need that. So just account and then our fields here. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. We should just have one line item here, one row in our table, because there is only one account that is in our Excel file. And we did quite a few steps in that grouped rows step, so it sometimes takes a little bit of time to load. All right, there we go. So we can see we've got one account. There are 29 transactions for that account. This many withdrawals, this much deposits, management fees, and our overall account value. Now, the reason that is so high is because one of my transactions was for Bitcoin, and I had a couple of those, so that's why that is a pretty astronomical value. If only I actually did have a couple of Bitcoins. All right, so there we've got our account table set. Now we need to manipulate our financial account table. So here, obviously this is account. So for the financial account, we want to make sure that we're grouping by the financial account. Now we're going to add a couple of groupings here. We want the account number, but we also want the account, and we also need to grab the financial account. The financial account is just the name of the financial account. So we've got the number, and then we've got, Kevin's 401k. And then I need to grab all the data points that I want to pull in for the financial account. So it's going to look very similar to the account record. So we're going to grab transactions this month. Transactions month. Withdrawals this month. It's this month. And management fees. And then we need to grab our account value, which is going to be our market value. So you can see, we're grabbing an overall account value or financial account value based on the market value from multiple line items. So, each financial account could have multiple holdings. So we're aggregating the sum of all those market values to get a financial account value. Same thing we did for the account. That account is including each individual financial account. This is going to do it for specific financial accounts. So we should have 5 rows once this finishes. And there's our 5 rows. So the individual financial accounts, the account that we need in order to, so, you may already, if you already have your, this information loaded into CRM, you don't necessarily need that, but in order to, if we want automatic financial account creation, we need to be able to link the financial account to the account. So there we've got transactions this month, withdrawals this month, deposits this month, management fees this month, and our account value for each of our individual financial accounts. Again, we don't need to make any updates to our holdings. Now, for the transactions, we do need to make one adjustment. Now, you'll remember I said each transaction has to have a transaction ID because that is the key for that particular table in Dynamics. Now, since it was a copy of this first transactions table, one of the things that I did for this is I pivoted on the transaction type column, which I don't need to do when I'm loading my transactions because they need to, that's a specific field that I'm filling in. So I'm going to remove that pivoted column step, and this should go back to looking like normal or as it was originally. So there we've got our transaction type as our singular column there instead of being broken out. So since this is not real data from Schwab or TD or Fidelity, I don't have an actual transaction ID. So one of the things that I can do within Power Query is I can add an index column. So I'm going to add a custom index column. We're just going to make this kind of look like it could be an actual transaction ID. I'm going to increment that by 1. And there we've got unique transaction IDs as an indexed column. So I believe we are all set. We've made all the changes that we need to for our specific tables. So now we can click Next. So I already set these to not load in the previous step. Now you'll see this this warning error. I'll show you what that is in just a moment. So for accounts, now we need to map where we want this information to go. So this is going to go to our account table. And this one takes a little bit longer to load since this is an out of the box entity. There's a lot more fields. Most of what I need to do is going to be a custom field, thank goodness. So those are all grouped together. So this is my deposit this month custom field. So I want to grab deposits this month. I want to map that from my file to that field. Management fees this month. My portfolio value is my account value. That is not something that we're using for this video. Transactions this month. Withdrawals this month. 1, 2, 3. We do need to have the name. That is our key column. The name is just the account. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That should be all of the columns that we're mapping to the account. Now we can move on to the financial account. And we're going to select our financial account here. That is a custom entity. So it's got that CR850 in front of it. So we've got our financial account. And now we're going to map our information. So the account name is actually the account. our account number 3, I had to recreate a field and didn't feel like going in and deleting it, so I just added 3, which is our account number, our account value, deposits this month, management fees this month. The name is the financial account. We're not uploading any primary contact on the financial account, which is something you could do. Transactions this month and withdrawals this month. So we're all set for the financial account. Now we can go to our transactions. We're going to load this to an existing table as well. And we've got our transaction table. So on the transaction, we have an amount. We've got the financial account number. We do not need a name for our transactions. I'm going to ignore that one. The quantity is the shares. Symbol goes to symbol. We've got our transaction date. Our transaction ID is our index column that we added in Power Query. And then we've got our transaction type. So now we're all set for the transaction table. Our holdings table, it's giving us an error message because it's telling us we need to define or there's already a column with the name. This isn't important because we're not loading a new table. We're going to load to an existing table. So we've already got a table built out for holdings. So there's our holding table. What's the current price of that particular stock, equity, or mutual fund, whatever we're using? We need to define the account number. What's the market value of that particular position? There's our market value. The name, this is just the name of the stock. So, APPL, it's going to be like Apple is the name. We're not using position value. Shares is going to be a quantity, and then symbol goes to symbol. So now we've defined where we want all of this data for these different tables or different queries to navigate to when we actually refresh or publish our data flow. So I'm going to click next. And again, here we have our option to either refresh manually or refresh automatically. I'm going to leave this set to manual, and I'm going to go ahead and publish my data flow. And if everything goes according to plan, we should not see any errors. And it should create a new account for Wilson Enterprises. It should create 5 financial accounts. I believe there are 40 transactions. Well, there are, 56 transactions. And it should also create our holdings for each financial account. So fingers crossed we don't get any errors. And there we go. We have a successful refresh. So now if I refresh in Dynamics, I should see a new account. There's my new account. If I go to my financial accounts tab, there we can see we've got my overall portfolio value, the number of transactions this month for this particular account. That's aggregating from all of these underlying financial accounts, the total deposits, the total withdrawals, the total management fees. I've got a nice little pie chart that does not look great because of the rather large values for these, because I put in Bitcoin for both of those, so that's kind of not great looking. We've got each of our financial accounts listed under our overarching account with our values, our account numbers, and whether or not there are deposits, withdrawals, management fees, or transactions in that particular month. So let's take a look at the traditional IRA. We've got our account number, the value, how many transactions for this specific financial account this month, deposits, withdrawals, and management fees. There we can see it created our holdings, which we can, we can click in and say, all right, here's our holding for Apple, what the symbol is, how many shares, the current price, and the market value. And then we can see all of our transactions listed below. So we've got, withdrawals, buys, deposits. So pretty neat. I mean, you can see how, these are just some very basic examples of data points that you can pull out or create based on other columns using Power Query. So very powerful, probably why they call it Power Query, but yeah, I think that should wrap this one up. Now, if I went back in and, added a financial account or, the next day downloaded my transactional data from the custodian, I can go back into my Excel file, add additional transactions or grab that new holdings report that is provided by the custodian, and add to this specific file, pull out, any information that I didn't necessarily need, but you can also do that within Power Query, refresh, and then you're going to see updated information and updated data here within Dynamics. So I hope everybody enjoyed the video. Until next time, have a good one.